Welcome to Aviation. Aerodynamics, and flight theory. I received a question from a student of A&P, Airframe and Powerplant. He's also a technician helper on the field, working for a very good company. You can do that. You can be going to school, to the A&P school, at the same time work as a technician helper. The only thing is, you will not be able to work by yourself. You will be under the supervision of a certificated technician. But there's something that this is something that you can do. Go to the A&P school and work as a helper on the field. And after you get your diploma from your school, and then you get your certificate, you pass your FA exams, and you get your certificate, then it will make it easier for you to become a very proficient technician, because as you go to school, you're working on the field, that you can see exactly, you can experience on the field what your professors are teaching you in class. Okay, so the question is, what is the difference between the Pitot tube and the static port on an airplane? The difference between the Pitot tube and the static port on an airplane. Well, I can tell you one thing. I can tell you, those two work in tandem. They work together, okay, toward accomplishing a common goal, which is providing air data to the pilot flying the aircraft, okay, via the airspeed indicators in the flight compartment. Okay, though there is a very tight relationship between the two, the Pitot tube and the static port, there are differences between them, and the most obvious one is the static port measures static pressure. The static port measures static pressure. On the other hand, the Pitot tube measures dynamic pressure. Okay, so there is no air, there's no air velocity going into the static port. There's nothing like that. The static port does not measure velocity, dynamic pressure. The pitot tube measures dynamic pressure. Okay, so that's part of the relationship between the two. Now, but now remember they work together. Okay, one is inside because there is the system. The system includes the dynamic pressure, okay, in front of a diaphragm, okay, and the static pressure, okay, in a chamber outside the diaphragm. So we can say the dynamic pressure is inside the diaphragm, and the static pressure is outside the system diaphragm. The diaphragm is a very thin piece of material that the pressure ratio, okay, the dynamic pressure ratio deflects, okay, in order to provide readings, airspeed readings to the airspeed indicator in the flight compartment. So the captain, so the pilot can see the altitude at which they are flying. So let me try to explain to you in more details what I'm talking about. You have on the aircraft the pitot tube, and you have the static port. Those two could be installed as one unit. Okay? But most airplanes have them in separate locations, and that is the advantage of having them in one unit is money saving. Okay, the companies that do have them in one unit save money by doing so. It is more expensive to have them separate, to install them separately on the aircraft, but they accomplish the same goal. There's the airstream that is going to go into the pitot tube is a free airstream, and it has its velocity, it has its pressure, and it has its dynamic pressure, and it also has its total pressure. The free airstream, it is free until it reaches the pitot tube and go inside the diaphragm. Okay. So the velocity, well, the free airstream is its characteristics are related to the sea level standard day. So the velocity of the sea level standard day velocity of the free airstream is 100 knots. The pressure, okay, it's 2,116 psf, the static pressure. The dynamic pressure is 34 psf. Now, if you add the dynamic pressure to the static pressure, then you get a total pressure of 2,150 psf. Okay. Now, the airstream that is going to enter the pitot tube is called relative wind. So I can define the relative wind as the wind produced by the moving aircraft through the air. And the pitot tube must be placed, must be installed at a location where it faces the relative wind. So the relative wind is parallel to the aircraft path, okay, but in the opposite direction. Okay, so I hope you understand what the relative wind is. The air, I would say, is the air movement produced by the airplane moving through the air, okay, and it's coming from the opposite direction but parallel to the aircraft path. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now when the airflow reaches the pitot tube port, what happens? It comes to a complete stop. So when it comes to a complete stop, at this point, the dynamic pressure, it's 0. So that means now everything is static pressure is total static pressure. Okay? Now, the total pressure now is static pressure. But since we're talking about total pressure, and we know that the Pitot tube receives total pressure. So the total pressure, which is, I'm talking about sea level standard day total pressure 2150 psi, that pressure goes into the Pitot tube and reaches the inside of the diaphragm. Okay, that pressure alone would push the diaphragm, would deflect the diaphragm too far, which would give inaccurate indications to the airspeed indicator. Okay, so now inside of the diaphragm we have total pressure, dynamic pressure, and then outside of the diaphragm now, okay, we in the chamber behind the diaphragm, outside the diaphragm, we have the diaphragm, we have the static pressure, which is 2116 psf. Okay, now when you take the total pressure inside the diaphragm, 2150 psf, and you subtract the static pressure, which is 2116 psi, what do you get? You get dynamic pressure of 34 psi, psf, 34 psf. This is the number, the dynamic pressure, which is the pressure ratio that deflects the diaphragm. Okay, in order to give the readings, the accurate readings to the airspeed indicator in the flight compartment, because the diaphragm is connected to the dial indicator needle, or well, you could say needle, but who knows. One thing I can say, the diaphragm is connected to the dial indicator. Okay, well, let's say needle, and the needle the indication moves according to the deflection of the diaphragm, and the deflection of the diaphragm is done by receiving a pressure ratio force. Okay, so it may sound a little bit complicated, but if you really understand the relationship between the two, you will come to understand how that works. So that is basically the difference in the relationship between the Pitot tube and the static port. Okay.